My son sent me to prison for 2 years for a crime I never committed. Every month, he and his wife came to visit behind the glass, playing the loving family. Every month, I refused to see them. Today I was released. They think they're picking up a broken old man who's lost his mind. They're wrong. Today is the day they lose everything. I'm Harlan Ford, 72 years old. For 730 days, I was inmate number 8940. If you've ever been betrayed by your own blood, hit that like button. Tell me what city you're watching from, because this isn't just a story. It's a warning. The steel gate slammed shut behind me at 8 in the morning, rain falling in cold, real sheets. Nothing like the moldy air I'd breathed for 2 years. I'd lost 30 pounds in there. Rage burns more calories than any treadmill. A silver Bentley pulled up, splashing dirty water on my shoes. My son Preston stepped out in a custom suit, flashing a smile. Not at me, at the paparazzi he'd tipped off for the redemption photo. He wrapped me in a hug for the cameras, then hissed in my ear, "Smile, Dad." The shareholders are watching. Then came Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, holding my infant grandson like a prop, cooing for the lenses. I looked through her like glass and walked past them both. Preston grabbed my arm. Soft hands, hands that had never worked a day, and I just looked at his grip until he let go. I walked instead to a beat-up black Ford where Garrett Hale, my lawyer and only real friend, stood waiting with an umbrella. As we pulled away, I heard Preston screaming that the house was his, the company was his, that I had nothing. I closed my eyes. "I'm not homeless," I whispered. "I'm on a business trip, and I'm coming to take it all back." In the car, Garrett handed me a folder soaked in red ink. The lake house sold, my watch collection auctioned, the pension fund drained. Preston had bled the company dry, and worse. After a crypto crash wiped out millions, he'd taken a $12 million bridge loan from a shadow lender called Nemesis Corporation, pledging his executive voting rights as collateral. Miss one payment, and Nemesis would seize the board. Garrett looked sick. "We need to stop this before the first payment's due." "We'll do nothing of the kind," I said. "Garrett, who do you think owns Nemesis?" His eyes went wide. 2 years in that cell, I hadn't just been surviving. I'd had a forensic accountant set up the shell company using the offshore funds Preston never knew existed. I was the shark. I'd handed my son the rope, and he was about to hang himself with it. "Then call the loan in now," Garrett said. "Not yet. Pain is a teacher, and Preston hasn't learned. Let him think he's safe. Let him climb higher. The fall only kills you from a great height." We drove to Ford Manor. My own biometric scanner rejected my thumbprint. They'd deleted me from my own house. Then sirens. Tiffany had called the police, screaming I'd threatened them, that I was a violent felon violating a restraining order. An officer had the cuffs half on my wrist when Garrett came running with a binder, reading aloud a clause my late wife Beatrice had written into the trust. I retained an irrevocable right to reside in the house for life. No sale or transfer could sever it. The officer ordered the gate opened. Preston, watching from the balcony with a drink in his hand, had no choice. Inside, my study, the room where I'd built an empire, had been gutted. Bookshelves stripped, walls painted clinical white, mirrors everywhere, my desk replaced by a treadmill and dumbbells. And above the fireplace, where Beatrice's portrait had hung for 20 years, there was nothing but empty wall. I found it in a mildewed storage closet, canvas torn, mold blooming on her blue dress. I knelt on the concrete and cleaned it with my bare hands. "I'm sorry, Bea," I whispered. "I should have protected you." That wasn't a mistake. That was a declaration of war. I carried the portrait to the living room. Preston found me there, sneering at that old thing, tossing $500 onto the coffee table like charity. "Stay in your room tonight. We have investors coming. Don't embarrass me." I thanked him quietly and pocketed the cash, the price of his arrogance. Then, while he wasn't looking, I planted a small listening device under his desk. "Speak loudly tonight, son. I want to hear every lie." That evening I found my old tuxedo, forgotten in the back of a closet, and walked down the staircase into his party. The music stopped. Preston's face went white. Tiffany, wearing my mother's diamond necklace, seized the moment to perform for the investors, painting me as a violent, senile old man she'd graciously forgiven after the incident. the miscarriage that had sent me to prison. I let her finish. Then, calmly, in front of everyone, I asked her one question. Was the baby we lost a boy or a girl? She said a boy, that they'd planned to name him after Preston. I pulled out a folded page, not the real medical file, just something to hold like one, and told the room that the actual hospital report showed no pregnancy at all. Only a ruptured ovarian cyst. Tiffany went the color of a corpse. Preston dragged her out, screaming that I was confused, senile, that the paper was probably a grocery list. But the doubt was already planted, and it was already growing roots. At 2 a.m, I sat in the dark with the earpiece in, listening to my bug. Preston, drunk and panicking, confessed everything to Tiffany. The crypto losses, the Nemesis loan, the payment due in a week he couldn't cover. Tiffany, ice cold, demanded $50,000 by Friday for the nanny, the doctor, security, and threatened to disappear with the baby and hand the press a story about a bankrupt CEO's abandoned family if he didn't pay. It wasn't love, it was a hostage situation, and my grandson was the hostage. I moved through the dark house and found her in my old study, flashlight in hand, punching failed codes into my wall safe, hunting for God knows what. I stepped out of the shadows. It's not going to open, Tiffany. She screamed, and when she tried to lie about looking for earrings, I told her what I actually knew. About the personal trainer, the motorcycle accident 2 hours before her fall down my stairs, the affair Preston never learned about. She fled up the stairs like the devil was behind her. I opened the safe myself with the one code that meant something now, 730, the days I'd served, and took out a single envelope. The next morning I found Sarah, Preston's ex, the mother of my true grandson, Danny, waitressing in a diner on the wrong side of town, thin, exhausted, flinching from customers. Preston had framed her 2 years ago with a staged affair, cut her off, and left her and Danny in a shelter while he bought Tiffany a Porsche. I told her the truth, that I knew the miscarriage was fake, that I owned Nemesis Corporation, that I needed a witness to bury them both. I handed her a $50,000 check and a promise, help me, and she'd never serve another cup of coffee again. She took off her apron on the spot. Next was the boardroom. I walked past my old security guard, Sam, who let me straight through, into a meeting where Preston was seconds from selling off the company's core division to foreign investors to cover his debts. He screamed that I had no shares, no rights, that I was nobody. I laid out proxy forms instead, signed by mechanics, drivers, secretaries, the entire employee stock ownership plan, 15% of the company handed to me overnight because I'd spent the previous day in the break rooms and loading docks while he planned his gala. It was enough to kill his supermajority. The investors packed up and walked out without a word. Preston hurled a glass at my head and missed. Fix the wall, I told him on my way out. It's coming out of your salary. Then I went after Dr. Elias Thorne, the obstetrician who'd signed the fake miscarriage affidavit that put me in prison. In his glass office full of hush money, I laid a wire transfer record on his desk, $50,000 from a shell company tied to Tiffany, deposited the same day he signed his lie. Then a traffic camera photo. Tiffany, injured on the back of a motorcycle with another man, hours before she staged her fall down my staircase. Thorne broke. He confessed on paper there'd never been a pregnancy, only a cyst, an affair, a bribe, and a convenient story to get rid of an inconvenient father-in-law who was asking too many questions. I had my confession notarized within the hour. The final act happened at the city's grand charity gala, 500 of the city's elite in the room. Preston stood at the podium promising a glittering future for Ford Logistics. At exactly 8 o'clock, the Nemesis press release hit every wire and every phone in that ballroom simultaneously. Ford Logistics defaults. Assets seized. Bankruptcy imminent. I walked out from the curtains and took the microphone from my son's shaking hand. You all just got a notification, I told the room. It says a company called Nemesis Corporation has seized every asset Ford Logistics owns. The building, the fleet, the voting rights. What it doesn't say is who owns Nemesis. I looked at Preston. I do. I'm the creditor. I'm the bank. As of tonight, I own this company. And the collateral on that loan included your house, Preston. You're homeless. He lunged at my throat, screaming that I'd stolen it from him. Sam tackled him to the floor before he reached me. Security dragged him and Tiffany out through the back, past a wall of reporters I'd made sure were waiting. Backstage, Tiffany turned on him instantly. No more loving wife, just a rat abandoning a sinking ship, screaming that she was filing for divorce and would bleed him dry for 18 years of support. That's when I delivered the last blow. I handed Preston a paternity test. 0% probability. The baby wasn't his. Then I dropped a photo of the real father, the personal trainer with the tattooed neck, at his feet, along with Dr. Thorne's signed confession, in front of every camera in the room. Preston collapsed to his knees, sobbing that he'd sent his own father to prison for a lie, begging to know if it was true. Tiffany's silence was the only answer he needed. He turned on her, calling her a monster. She kicked him away and broke down for the cameras, not from guilt, but because her entire performance as a socialite had just ended in front of the only audience that mattered to her. I called Sam. Arrest them both. Outside, under flashing police lights, they cuffed Tiffany first. She went out screaming that she was a Ford, that her husband owned the city, right up until the cruiser door slammed on her voice. Then came Preston, silent, broken, walking to his own arrest like a man headed to the gallows, until he saw me, and collapsed at my feet, begging me to make it stop, to tell them it was a mistake, to remember that family protects family. I looked down at my son in chains. I protected you for 40 years, I told him. I gave you everything, and you chose a liar over your own blood. You locked me in a cage to silence me. I've taught you everything I can. Now I'm sending you to a new school. Maybe the walls will finally teach you what the silence never could. I nodded to the officers. Take him. He screamed my name the whole way to the car. I didn't look away, and I didn't stop them. Weeks later, my office was mine again. The treadmill and mirrors gone. My desk restored. The skyline outside sharp and clean instead of gray. Sarah sat across from me in a tailored suit, no longer a frightened waitress, but my new chief financial officer. The woman who'd found 3 of Preston's hidden accounts in her first 2 weeks. Together we signed the paperwork for the Harlan Ford Legal Defense Fund, $5 million to protect elderly people being financially exploited by their own families, so no one else would rot in a cell because their children wanted an early inheritance. Danny, she told me, had asked if Grandpa was coming to his soccer game Saturday. I told her to tell him I'd be there, orange slices included. Then my assistant buzzed through, a collect call from the state correctional facility. Preston. I stared at the blinking light for a long moment. The old version of me would have answered before it finished ringing, would have rushed to fix whatever mess he'd made, the way I always had. That man was gone. He'd died in a cell somewhere over the last 2 years. Put him through, I said, on speaker. Preston's voice came through thin and desperate over the prison noise, begging for a real lawyer, for money in his commissary account, complaining about the food, about a sentence of 10 to 15 years. Not once did he ask about his son. Not once did he apologize to Sarah. Even in chains, he was still the same boy who thought the world owed him a living. I'm not angry, Preston, I said. Anger implies surprise. I'm not surprised anymore. Blood is thicker than water, Dad. You always said that. I did, I said, but I learned something new in the dark. Blood can also be poisonous, and when a limb goes gangrenous, you don't keep it because it's part of you. You cut it off to save the rest of the body. No, Dad, wait. I hung up. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was light, like setting down a pack I'd been carrying for 2 years. Sarah watched me, her eyes wet, not with sadness but with understanding. Are you okay? She asked. I walked to the window and looked out over the city, small cars, small people, chaotic and beautiful and moving on beneath me. I'm better than okay, I said. I'm free. I turned back to her. People say family is everything. They say blood is destiny, that you forgive it no matter what it costs you. They're wrong. Family isn't about shared DNA. It's about who stands by you in the rain, who respects you when you have nothing left to give them, who tells you the truth even when it hurts. I picked up my pen and looked at the woman who'd walked out of a diner with nothing but a $50,000 check and the courage to use it. I lost a son who saw me as nothing more than a bank account, I said. I gained a daughter who sees me as a man. And Saturday, I'm watching my grandson play soccer. That's a fair trade. I opened the next file on my desk. Now let's get back to work. We have an empire to run. If this story hit you, if you've ever had to draw a line against the people who were supposed to love you most, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to walk away from family to save yourself?